This week, the latest from comics journalist Joe Sacco, Paying the Land, focusing on the Dene people of the western Northwest Territories of Canada. Kumar joins me to discuss a book that's both devastating and hopeful, and occasionally even funny. But first, help keep this podcast coming out weekly. Support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. With your pledge of at least $4 a month, you can access hours of bonus podcasts, including an issue-by-issue discussion of The Amazing Spider-Man by Lee and Ditko. Pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
All right. So we just a couple weeks before you hear this, you will have heard Kumar and Jordan talking about Hellblazer, and I was telling him that was the first face-to-face recording on this show since the Akira episode way back last spring.
Shocking.
Recorded, I think it was recorded like at the end of February, just as we were kind of becoming aware that this pandemic was starting. And Mulele and I used to meet up to record sometimes, but all of our recording last year was on Skype. I haven't seen him in like a year. So now, of course, a lot of times we just record on Skype because we're on different continents. So.
Sometimes it's just convenient. I've even done episodes with Emmett over Skype just because it's easier than trying to schedule a meeting time or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah, I definitely felt weird being in the same room with, someone and talking about comics. It's been a long time since that happened.
Yeah. Okay, so this time we're talking about the new book from Joe Sacco called Paying the Land. Which is about I hope I'm pronouncing this right, the Dene people?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because there's no, unlike Safe Area Garage, though, where he gave us a little bit of a pronunciation guide, he doesn't give us any for anything. Well, let's go with that. I mean, we're going to butcher the names and titles, and that's, but you have to understand that a lot of these things are, when it comes to First Nations, a lot of times the colonizers came in and they had these crazy applications of the English alphabet where letters just not correspond to what they would correspond to in English for sounds that don't exist in English. And they were trying to come up. I've seen I think I saw Apache. There was this weird, they came up with all these weird symbols to try to accommodate the language and stuff. And it's just not... It's just it's almost the point of the book is that they've just tried to force this system onto the and we're supposed to guess from Dene that how this is pronounced, and it might have nothing to do with it.
Well, and as he mentions other native peoples of Canada, there's one name that has an L with a line drawn through it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that's supposed to represent.
Yeah, no, I don't really know how to pronounce any of them either. And that's, part of it too is that, again, it goes right to the heart of the book, is that also at this stage they don't even really want us to know the names or how to pronounce them. The government has tried to erase them to such a degree that it's not a surprise that if we do a disservice to pronouncing them.
Mm-hmm. So, I just want to clarify here. Now, you have spent a lot of your life in Canada before Japan and Australia. Were you born there?
I was born in India, but my parents were living in the States at the time, and my mother flew to India to give birth to me, and that was because the cost per day in the hospital in India at that time was about $1.20 or something like that. So she went there, had me, and then like within 6 or 7 months she flew. During that time, my father found a job in Canada, and this is my understanding of it, and I might have some of these facts wrong. Then she flew directly back to Canada, I believe. So since less than 1 year old. But I did learn much later in life that I actually, because of my birth circumstances, I didn't actually have Canadian citizenship until I was 5 years old or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you do have a Canadian passport now?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And did you have any, you lived way off in the east area,
Yes.
I guess, but did you have any experience with any of the First Nations people?
I had a couple of friends in school, but I mean, one of them was he'd moved up from the States. I think he'd moved up from Maine, I want to say. But he was a really interesting guy because he almost saw it. He almost saw the way the tribal lands were drawn out. So for him, I think it was like moving from. He was still within his own territory when he moved from Maine up to New Brunswick. That way, I don't think he saw it as moving. Don't think he really cares about the western borders, if you know what I mean. Or that's the way he kind of talks about it. But yeah, very, very few friends around. Certainly, but I mean, they were around, and it's a really different situation from Australia where, like in Canada, every TV sitcom has one First Nations person on it, like almost as a token, as like a main character. I say token, but they're like a main character in the show, but it's almost obligatory that one will be there almost all the time. Whereas in Australia, they've been made so invisible by the general population. You almost never, when they come out, it's really a token. So there was kind of that in Canada. So there was a little bit of awareness, but certainly there was nothing. I don't remember being taught anything about the native peoples in school. And something we'll talk about a lot in this book is the residential schools, which is probably the blackest stain in Canada's history, in my opinion, was something I never heard about until probably around like 2000, like maybe 20 years ago. Like, it's not anything you ever heard about while I was growing up there or in schools there or anything like that. And it was only like really when the inquest and all that kind of stuff happened around 2008 that it really came to light how awful that whole thing was. And it's funny because they had there were I think the last residential school in Canada closed around 96. They had a very similar system in Australia also until the 90s. And I remember even when I arrived here, so I arrived here in 2004, and I remember hearing about it and feeling so superior that Canada didn't have this such a shameful past with these schools where they're trying to where they were ripping these children from their families, from their parents, and trying to erase their native heritage completely. And I was like, oh yeah, we're not like that. Canada's a great nation, whatever. And then within a few years, it started to dawn on me, and I started hearing the stories that this was happening in Canada as well.
Yeah, well, I was completely unaware of it. And so, I'm reading this book, and the first kind of half of the book, he's going through, like, problems with, how white people treated native people. And at first it kind of feels like, yeah, well, that's not so bad. I think America's worse. And then you get to chapter 4 and all the residential school stuff. I'm like, oh, geez.
Yeah. Well, there's a line in there. I wish I'd written it down, and I didn't. But there is a line where he says something about how Canada's approach is different from south of the border, where south of the border was almost like wholesale slaughter was almost the approach. Whereas
right.
North it was like administrative.
Yeah, we just killed them.
And he doesn't say it explicitly at that point. It's pretty early on. And I think it's like page 120 or so where he starts talking about the residential schools, but I was reading the first 100 pages as like, is he going to mention the schools? Like, it's weird that we've gotten 100 pages through this and he hasn't talked about them. But then there's a line at some stage where he says, like, some character went to a school or something, and Let me see if I can find it.
Where he says, like, we'll get to that later or
yeah,
something?
we'll get to that later. And, so government policies funneled indigenous children into schools. We'll get to that. Hastened the day when the Dene swapped life on the land. Sorry, I'm reading this terribly. Hastened the day when the Dene swapped life on the land for settlement in hamlets and towns. So there's that tiny little mention of it. And as soon as he said that, I was like, I started to get upset. I was like, oh, I don't want to hear the story. Now I don't want to hear the story about the residential schools. I was really worried that he was going to go into it. And sure enough, then we get this whole chapter about it later on. But
I wanted to mention the meaning of the title, Paying the Land. So it's explained on page 50. A custom of giving the land a gift in return for what it gives to you. Like some little thing, he mentioned a bullet, for example, or
tobacco was...
Tobacco, yeah.
Or something like that.
So just as a way of thanking the land. And, a major theme of the book is the relationship between people and the land, and contrasting how, like, the Dene or other, native peoples have this reverence and thankfulness toward the land versus white people or maybe other cultures that tend to just take what they want and leave a mess behind.
Yeah. It really, that message really coalesces at the end when he talks about the arsenic and that we were paying the land back.
Yeah, in that former gold mine.
Yeah.
Where the byproduct is arsenic, and they're just storing the arsenic there and trying to keep it out of the water supply.
Yeah, for 100 years this thing is supposed to work. Yeah, crazy. Anyway, that's the end of the book. Well, how do we want to approach this? Do we want
to... Well...
It's kind of like... so I think he says at the end and the afterwards, it was planned as a magazine, a 2-part magazine feature. And it does certainly read like a feature you'd read in like Newsweek or something like that. And there's a lot of characters in it, and it's hard to keep track of them. It's a bit like watching a documentary movie where these talking heads pop up, and it's 3 scenes later you don't remember who that guy was before.
Yeah.
And it's not a fault of the book. I think that's just the way documentary works, at least for me. It's very hard to keep track of those kinds of things, but it really it still does feel a bit like a magazine feature, except he's blown it up to a huge size. It's 260 pages. And I love the way it starts, because you just get this guy telling this story about what it was like to be living purely on the land. And I don't know if you remember, a long time ago we reviewed a book called How to Survive in the North by Luke Healy from Nobrow. And I mentioned that I really love any books about harsh or extreme environments and surviving out there, like in deserts or tundras. And it was really fascinating stuff. And I really was wondering at the beginning, like, is this going to be the whole book? And I thought...
Yeah, I was too.
I thought that's really unusual for Joe Sacco. But then he gets to this... But then you start... It's something interesting because from his previous books he's actually talking to someone. So this isn't like 300 years ago or something. This is within the past 50 or 60 years. This harsh land living is happening. And then there's a few mentions about like, what kind of European things did you have? And they were like, we would trade for knives or something like that. And then at the end, he's like, okay, this is all fine, but what about, tell us, maybe we should talk about the plane, or when the plane arrived, or there's a line like that at the end of that introductory chapter. Which is also kind of the first hint of the schools, but you don't realize it at the time. But I did find it interesting that I thought he had given up his kind of journalistic ways. But I love it.
I wondered if it was all going to be a first-person account from this one guy.
But I do love it when Joe reveals himself as the journalist or the interviewer or the intruder sometimes almost, and he's quite honest about that when he turns up like that. And then the book kind of turns into something else.
Well, but yeah, that first scene was really interesting. It made me think about how, most of us would say we wouldn't want to live that way.
Yeah.
It must be really tough, but at the same time, you could see, they're really a functioning community, and they all have to work together, and there's no time to fight about stupid stuff like there is in our societies.
Yeah.
So, there would be certainly some positives about living that way.
And there's actually only one person I think talked about how she didn't like living on the land, and she didn't like living on the land, and she was grateful to not be living there anymore. And this woman's mother had 14 children in the same wicker chair.
Yeah.
And it was really hard. And they all talk about how hard it was. Some summers or some winters, or you would struggle to find food. And somebody talks about how if you starve for 2 or 3 days, that's normal. That's like being an animal. Like animals sometimes don't eat for 2 or 3 days. But yeah, that stuff is all really fascinating to me. But it's also, it's not like something they've left behind. It's almost one of the core things about the book, because at the end of it, they're talking about, well, the solution is we have to go back to the land, go back to living completely on the land. And it's to jump ahead again to the colonialization stuff. It's an interesting situation, because when you live on the land and you eat what you kill and you wear what you kill and you build a shelter out of trees that you cut down, you don't need any money. But as soon as the system comes from outside and imposes a system over your way of life and says, okay, your pelt is worth $60, now hunting for 3 days for this thing is not feasible anymore. It's not something you would want to do to...
Not cost effective.
No, not cost effective. You can't survive anymore like that. So it's really interesting at the end when they talk about going back. When they go back, it means not just going out. Sometimes they're talking about, oh, we'll take the kids out for a few days or a few weeks, but not going out there for 10 months of the year or 11 months like they used to. But some people are kind of talking about, well, we should go back out there full time. And I definitely felt like that's the only... If your pelt is only worth $60, it's better to eat that animal and make a coat out of that thing and find a use for its bones than to try to come back into a Western settlement and try to sell it, for sure.
Another thing about that early scene was it was interesting to me that they don't have gender roles, because there's a possibility that you're going to be stuck out on the land by yourself sometimes, so you need to be able to cook, and you need to be able to do quote unquote masculine stuff also, so you got to learn everything. And then he also mentions that, or one of the characters, I'm saying characters, but these are real people that he interviewed. Someone mentions that that shifted as soon as they built settlements. So as soon as they built Western-style, Euro-Western settlements, and the Indians were basically forced into them, then the men would go out to hunt, and the women would stay back with the children in the community, in that settlement where they built buildings. So again, it was totally an effect of the colonization that had happened. Okay, so this buildup I was talking about. So first he gets into, of course, the oil industry. And fracking and that kind of thing, and how it's intensifying Dene social problems. And this is, by the way, Western Northwest Territories. Near Yukon. And, the oil industry has some positives for them. It helps to fund the schools and so forth. But it has a lot of negative effects also on the society. Never mind the environmental effects. That's another problem on top of it. And some of the natives saying, we will control resource extraction. It will not control us. They don't want to get rid of it, but they want to be in control of it and not just kind of have it done without consulting them and then leaving them with the mess.
Yeah.
Now, that gets into the treaties that were made. And so I was thinking, like, I had heard not too long ago that in the U.S., there was never a treaty with Native people that the U.S. stuck to. The U.S. broke every single treaty.
Right.
Now, in the case of Canada, it sounds like the treaties were so advantageous to Canada, there was no reason not to stick to them. Really taking advantage of the Native people.
Yeah. There was the word they use constantly is extinguishing or extinguishment or something like that, where basically the natives extinguished all rights to the land at all. And there was two sets of treaties. There was one in, I can't remember. There's one called Treaty 11. I can't remember when it was.
I think that
made.
I think it was 19th century.
Yeah, oh no, because some of the people were still alive.
Early 20th.
Yes.
I guess it was early 20th century.
Yeah, I think some of the grandparents of these elderly people were
like 1920 something.
Yeah, or 11 or something. Oh, maybe I'm confusing it with. Anyway, so basically that said that the. Effectively said, you give up everything and we'll give you a stipend of $5 a year or something like that.
Like per person, I think it was.
Per person, yeah. Yeah, so there was a whole lot of... I think Joe did a great job kind of delineating all the why the treaty doesn't work. So they're a culture without written language. For the most part at this stage. So they don't, everything is, or I shouldn't say they're without written language, I say everything is transmitted orally. So these written contracts that these Euro-Western settlers came in with kind of don't mean anything to them. And that was only one of the many...
and the Native people, I think it's similar to the ones in the U.S. also, felt like that the land didn't belong to them in the first place. They belonged to the land.
Exactly. And also
for somebody else to come in to say, we want to take your land, like, okay, well, you can use it. We're using it too.
It's not ours to give you anyway. Yeah. And there's also, they viewed it as a friendship treaty between them and Canada, which is a really Canadian thing. To say, this is... this is all about us being friends, so sure, we'll let you use this land or whatever.
A friendship pact that guaranteed their livelihood.
Yes.
Some of them saw it. Yeah,
and this is ongoing because we had pipeline protests last year, or 2019 now, on the West Coast. And on the East Coast this past summer, just 5-6 months ago, we had all this issue about this lobster fishing treaty on the East Coast in Halifax, which included, white fishermen firebombing this native, like, lobster fishery or hut or something like that. There was a little craziness happening, and it's all about the wording of these treaties. But yeah, so there was that issue of the oral, the fact that it wasn't an oral thing. It's just like didn't mean anything to them. And what I did find interesting was that even though Canada was just adhering to the word of it effectively and doing what the treaty said, there was a bit of flexibility about it, because then later on we get to these other hearings where this pipeline is going to come through, and they're like, okay, well, we'll put a 10-year halt on this until we can sort out exactly what those previous treaties meant. And I think it seems like they were kind of conciliatory about it, and gave the natives, agreed that the native, like the judge was like, yes, the natives, this is native land, and those treaties aren't valid or whatever. But I would say also, so the first Joe Sacco book I read is Palestine, which I think was his first journalistic work. And I feel like that book was, the treaty stuff in there, or the history, was very confusing. And I almost felt at the time like, is comics the right medium for talking about this? Because it's really hard to keep track of, and the drawings aren't making it clear for me, and the maps and things. Safe Area Garage is still my favorite. I don't have any issues like that in there at all. Maybe because there wasn't that much talk about the history stuff in it, or maybe just it was just clear. This time I feel like maybe I don't know if I was wrong about Palestine or if he's gotten a lot better at this after 25 years of doing it. But it was a lot clearer. There's still a lot of treaty talk and demarcations of maps and stuff that's like, I'm having trouble following it. Again, I don't think it's a fault of the book at all. I think it's complicated, period. But I think it was much easier reading than it was in Palestine.
Okay, I don't think I've ever read Palestine. Yeah, we read the Safe Area Garage
and Journalism, which
Journalism
was,
for another
shorts.
episode.
Yeah.
Long ago.
Yeah.
Coming up, the residential schools, the more hopeful and occasionally comedic points of the book, and the fantastic art. Thanks to our supporters on Patreon, another set of classic early episodes of Deconstructing Comics has been unlocked, and I'm putting those episodes back on the site in reverse order. This week I'll republish number 33 from July 21st, 2006, in which Brandon and I wish we were at San Diego Comic-Con. Brandon had been there the year before and talks about the experience, something that might seem like a wistful memory to many of us at this point. Find the classic Deconstructing Comics episodes on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by choosing the earliest months listed in the sidebar pull-down menu at deconstructingcomics.com, in publicly available posts on our Patreon page, or in the Patreon smartphone app. Classic episodes have been unlocked back to number 31, so only 2 more classic episodes will be re-released unless we meet our next Patreon goal, unlocking 15 more classic episodes. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Sawate. My name is Stella, and I am the host of Backrow to Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. Backrow to Oracle is a podcast dedicated to Barbara Gordon, the first woman to hold the mantle of Backrow for an extended period of time, roughly 1967 to 1988. The goal of Backrow to Oracle is to examine the character's history from her first appearance as Batgirl and continuing through her tenure as Oracle. Each episode looks at a vintage issue of Detective Comics or Batman, as well as other books like Justice League and Freedom Fighters, and modern issues of Batgirl and Birds of Prey. I also keep track of news involving Batgirl and other members of the Bat family, and I have a revolving series of segments like Babs in the Tube, which highlights appearances of Babs in TV and film, Shipper Spotlight, which looks at a variety of comic and pop culture couples, gives their history, and determines whether they are hot or not, Reading with Stella, which could be described as an audio drama, or just me reading a book that relates to Babs or doesn't, and of course, the mainstay literature recommendation. I have been blessed to interview writers Scott Beatty and Chuck Dixon on their Backroll Year 1 work, Brian Q. Miller on his Backroll run, Dwayne Swarzinski and Christy Marks on their separate Birds of Prey work, and the creators and actors of the Backroll Spoiled, the web series. I hope to interview more creators and actors in the future. My goal, most importantly, is to make a fun, entertaining, and thoughtful show that people enjoy and from which they learn. Find the show online at thebatmanuniverse.net and iTunes, and follow the show on Facebook and Twitter at Backroll to Oracle. Thank you, and fly on, Babs lovers.
So there's all this stuff about the resource extraction and the land treaties, and then you get into the residential school stuff. And this is really kind of the source of the social problems that the oil business is exacerbating.
Yes.
Because you had these I guess it lasted for 150 years that they were like dragging kids away to these prison-like schools.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if there was like a period where it was happening more and then it kind of faded out or what, but like the whole older generation in this community had to live through this, where you got these nuns who were telling you can't speak your language, you have to speak English, and you're inferior to us, and you're not worth anything, and a lot of corporal punishment. And so this whole generation was just sort of just struggling with PTSD.
Yeah. And not only that, I mean, they leave the schools and they go back and they're outcast by their own societies, their own cultures.
Yeah, they don't fit in anymore.
They don't fit in. They don't speak the language. They don't know how to cut wood anymore. All those kind of things that were beaten out of them physically, or as one person says, emotionally and spiritually, psychologically beaten out of them. There's horrific stories about 5-year-olds getting raped on the first day of school by the other kids. It's like a prison. And so they don't fit in anymore. And so basically the communities become split apart by this thing. Even if not everybody in the community went to the residential school, and certainly they didn't, it only takes a few of them to go out to the schools, and then they don't fit in anymore. And they have not seen their parents in 10 years, so they don't know how to be a parent when they have kids. And the only way is self-medicating, as they call it, which is drinking themselves into a stupor and
drinking and drugs and
becoming alcoholics. Then their kids see that, and the next generation who did not go to even if they didn't go to the school, they end up in the same behaviors. And another thing that happens is there's a really sad scene at the end where they're talking about putting up this cell phone tower, and the chief is like, okay, everybody, what do you think now? Traditionally, the Dene would have a consensus decision about putting up a cell phone tower, and they'll say, you decide. And he's like, the reason they did that is because the residential schools taught them not to speak up for themselves, to just shut up. So the way that the community would make a decision has been broken as well by these schools. Everything's been destroyed by it, and there's literally RCMP coming in full uniform and dragging these kids, and some of them are trying to run off into the woods sometimes with their families because they're like, the plane's coming, and they just round up whichever ones they can, shove them onto this plane, and force them to go to this school. And even if that's not happening, the government is... So they're also threatening parents with arrest or confiscating their fishing traps or their hunting traps or whatever if they don't send their kids to the schools. Even if they're not going to those schools, they're forcing the kids into any school. They say kids have to go to school. So now the families have to move into communities. So they're forced out of living in the bush into living in these towns and giving up their way of life. It was just shocking beginning to end.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking. But did it come too late in the book, is my question.
Well, because he kind of acknowledges that himself. He says, maybe I should have gotten to this earlier.
Yeah.
But I felt like he probably situated it in the middle of the book on purpose, because maybe it would be too harsh to hit on it right at the beginning.
Yes.
And so he kind of builds up to it with the resource extraction and the land treaties, and then let's get to the big thing.
Yeah.
And then the second half of the book, it's more kind of like looking forward. Now what happens since all this has happened?
I guess that's true. That is true. But my feeling was we go through the first half and we hear about all these inability to deal with modern, let's call it Euro-Western living. We get stories about people who get drunk and then pass out outside and freeze to death where it's minus 40. And we hear all these kinds of stories, and I'm kind of in my mind, okay, why is this happening? And Joe himself doesn't go into it. He just says, oh yeah, there's a high rate of alcoholism, or there's high rates of abuse. And
domestic abuse of kids or spouses.
Yes, exactly. He talks about all that he describes all these things happening. He doesn't really get into the nuts and bolts and why. I remember someone once told me that the ability to, your body's ability to process alcohol is a mutation that Europeans have, so that other cultures their bodies deal with the alcohol much worse. Now, I don't know if that's true, but all that kind of stuff was running through my mind as I was reading the first third of the book. And then you get to the residential schools, and then it's really colors everything else. And he says it. He says there's something hovering over the... Let me find the exact words, because... something has been circling above these stories, in fact, haunting this entire project. This is on page 121 when he first gets to talking about the residential schools. And I feel like on my second reading, definitely that's what was in my mind the whole time, is the damage done by the schools, and that's why that was one of the core reasons that the treaties were breaking down and these people were getting drunk and dying in the cold. And I don't know if there's a better solution. I think you're right. I think to make it come earlier would maybe be too much.
Yeah, I mean, I can see picking that up and, these kids were dragged off to schools against their will and beaten, and, like, I don't want to read this.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a better solution. And he himself knows that he does say that maybe I should have talked about this earlier. But I don't know what I would have done in his shoes.
Yeah. Well, and at least, the land treaty stuff is a little bit older history, I guess. It goes so chronologically. You could put that first, although the resource extraction is ongoing.
Yeah.
So I thought it was significant. He includes one of his interviewees talking about the residential schools, kind of looking at the other side of it.
Yeah.
Talking about the nuns who were put in charge of the schools, who were often women from Quebec, who had come from large families and had been, the Catholic families in Quebec traditionally would promise one girl to the convent and one boy to the priesthood. Never mind what the kids wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so, this girl herself would be hauled off to do something she didn't want to do.
Yeah, so it's broken right from the Christian tenets of it, Yeah.
Yeah, and then she's a native French speaker, supposedly trying to speak English to kids who are not allowed to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
And dealing with supply shortages and whatever. It's they were under a lot of stress themselves. So it doesn't excuse the treatment of the kids, but I think it's better than just saying they were monsters.
Yeah. No, the whole thing beginning to end was. Yeah, and I mean,
unpleasant for all concerned.
No, yeah, and it does seem to have using the excuse of Christianity to carry out the government's desire to wipe out the native peoples, to make them non-existent. And a few times it's mentioned that about how they even considered in 1969 abolishing Indian status in favor of equality and assimilation. So therefore, if you're assimilated, you wouldn't have any say that this land belongs to us. You're under the same banner as the rest of Canada or whatever. It was the inquest deemed it. The term they used was cultural genocide, and I would say it was like systematic, slow motion genocide, really trying to make them cease to exist, and it's slowly working.
Although that last part of the book does hit some more positive notes, talking to some of these younger Dene who are trying to overcome what the residential schools did to their parents, grandparents, and like you said, I think talking about going back to the land, and what one of them is talking about, like, imagine me as a tour guide saying, yeah, there's gold over there, but just leave it there.
Yeah, I love that.
There are diamonds over there, but we don't need them.
Yeah, that was my favorite philosophy of the whole. Well, he had some other great lines about in there too. Did you happen to note the page that was on?
No, I didn't.
Oh yeah. We better be prepared to welcome them and to teach them that there's a better way than just taking and taking and taking what you don't need. And then I just thought that was such a perfect description of it. There's diamonds over there. Oh yeah. There's gold down there. You can't touch it, though. Just leave it there. There's diamonds over there, too, but we have no use for that. Can you imagine a society like that? Yeah. Yeah, conceptually, I really love that idea. And I love the idea of going back to the land, too. But that idea is espoused by this certain chief his last name is Deneron, Harry Deneron. So it was him, but he's kind of one of the strongest proponents of bringing in the oil, or them cleaning up the mess themselves. I mean, the natives, the Dene, cleaning up the mess, and that way there would be jobs or infrastructure created just to deal with toxic waste.
Mm-hmm. Now, there is a little bit of humor in this book, too. Mostly aimed at himself,
yes.
Sacco. So at the beginning of the book, when you see him and his guide like going out the first time, and everybody's scolding them like, you don't have a radio,
yeah.
You only have 2-wheel drive. I don't know about this. You're gonna get stuck out there. And then later, when I thought it was interesting. He's talking about how. Have you noticed, reader, that we've hardly seen any animals? And so when he gets a chance to go out with the guy to check his fish nets that are propped up under the ice, then he goes. And when he sees a trout pulled out, he calls himself Joe of the North. Joe of the North scoops up the fish, and he has engaged with the fauna and redeemed himself in the eyes of his readers. So yeah, he pokes fun at himself sometimes.
Yeah. There is a line which is I don't know if I should say funny, but he's talking to Willard. I can't remember Willard's last name. He says the government pulled people out of the bush to put their children in schools, and they graduated from their independence on the land into a money-based economy with no jobs. So they couldn't very well let them starve to death, but I imagine they probably wouldn't have minded that either. But it wouldn't look good in history books. It's called genocide, I think. Mm-hmm. Which is a really dark, sarcastic line, but every word of it really rang true to me, especially that they wouldn't have minded that either. In Australia, you really get the sense that the government wouldn't mind if the Aboriginals all just vanished, and were just never seen or heard from again. Not a thing to worry about. But it wouldn't look good in the history books. It's called genocide, I think. Yeah. Was there any other bits? Oh, well, we haven't talked about the art at all as well.
Right, I was just about to bring that up.
Okay.
Because the art is really sharp.
Oh my God, it's amazing, and it's as he has done since day one. I mean, the faces. Everybody has their own face. Everybody has a different face, and that has been true since Palestine and Garajda as well. But it's so. It's not like reading a magazine article. It really brings so much emotional context to it. Having living faces with an expression that captures what the emotion of what they're saying. And an amazing thing I thought was astounding that he did in this was he shows people at different ages. He meets these people when they're maybe 60, and he draws them when they're 20 or 10, and you can tell it's that same person. And somehow he has extrapolated. He has such a keen eye for facial characteristics that he's able to figure out in a way that you believe 100% is that person when they were 15 years old or something.
Yeah, I was wondering, did he ask all his interviewees for photos of themselves?
Yeah, I wondered that too.
In the past, I mean, he couldn't have gotten photos of all of them at whatever age he needed.
Oh yeah, and especially some of these people did not have cameras or anything.
No.
Speaking of which, let's talk about the nature scenes, which are, often I love, my favorite pages were the ones where he did collages kind of a lot of different stuff happening in the bush at different time periods, and there were no panel borders. So you really get it's almost the phrase they use again and again is time immemorial, and you really get a sense of without the panel borders, you really get a sense of it being timeless, and it's just being this kind of thing that's been happening for thousands of years out in the bush like that. And I mean, the pine trees. Did he have some sort of cheat like Bob Ross or something? Because he draws every pine needle on every tree, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, did he spend hours doing this, or did he have some sort of method of with his pen that he was able to bang out these pine trees in 10 seconds or something?
Yeah, I'm looking 244 and seeing all those the trees off to the left and the trees that go partway up the mountain, and it looks like a photograph. Yeah.
And another thing I really loved was like there was something like on page, let me see if I can find it, 55. So somebody describes to him, in the summertime, we were on the river most of the time because the people had their canoe. And sometimes they had a 3.3 horsepower kicker, puff, 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 an outboard motor. Now imagine somebody states that sentence to you. How do you depict that? He's done this beautiful drawing with these canoes in the background, the motorboat in the foreground, and like all the mountains around it. And the composition is really perfect. And he's combined a bunch of things which he doesn't have a photograph of, or he hasn't looked at, into this one drawing that really is a beautiful drawing to look at. And there's another one on page 39 similarly, where they're talking about people talking about the alcohol problem and prostitution, and he's got this drawing of a guy passed out on the curb and some prostitutes leaning into the window of a pickup truck. And it's really, again, somebody's just told him a sentence or something, and he's kind of coalesced them into these powerful images. And there's no, especially the bush living stuff, there's probably very little photography of that, and I'm really amazed at how I really feel like you're in that world, and I felt that way with all of Joe Sacco's stuff, more than watching a documentary or reading about it in prose or anything like that. Totally, in Joe Sacco's comics, you really enter that world and are a part of it. And I felt the art was so great, every page of it.
Yeah, for sure.
And some of these are dated, like he's dated every page, and I think it's 2016, so I think the earliest ones are around 2016. So to pull this off in, 3 years is really pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I got the feeling that he had to have recorded these interviews, because he quotes his interviewees so extensively.
Yeah.
You'll have narration box after narration box that's what that person is saying.
Yeah.
And you really get a sense of what those people sound like.
Oh yeah,
because he includes their grammar, their vocabulary, their language quirks. So it really sounds like what you would like. Oh yeah, I guess I've heard native people who spoke like that, who spoke English like that. It's almost like you're listening to them.
Yeah, there's very little intrusion from him. Yeah, he lets them, and he has that method of putting a caption, like a rectangular caption box, and attaching it to the oval word balloon to
it's
kind
like
of guide
a comic's way of leading into a quote.
Yeah,
where you've got the little square narration box that's stuck to the word balloon.
Yes,
and leads right into that sentence.
And the other thing is there are a lot of pages where the balloons actually read from right to left instead of left to right, but he's laid out the page in such a way that I never read anything in the wrong order. Like there's such a natural flow to the page design, I found, that he just knows how to carry your eye through, even if you're going counterclockwise or some weird thing that he's come up with.
Yeah, I got lost on those a couple of times, but I was reading the PDF that we got from the publisher, and so I couldn't see the entire page at once, and that might have messed up my reading experience. Metropolitan Books, I should mention. But yeah, so thanks to them for sending the PDFs. That is what I read. I know you bought the paper book anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anything else we need to say about this?
Well, I made all my notes in like Windows Notepad, and then what I do these days is then I copy it over into Word, and when I pasted it, it came out to 6 pages, because I'd actually, there was almost a line on almost every page that I found was really insightful or telling. So I mean, I think it's an amazing book as usual from Joe Sacco. I think maybe. Safe Area is still maybe my favorite by half an inch. But it's really... There's a line in 1984 by George Orwell where he says the best books are the ones that tell you what you already know. And that really hit home for me with this one, because... when he gets to the climax, and the climax, quote unquote, at the end of the book, somebody talks about how the idealization of Western concepts, and how the Aboriginals are seeking validation from the non-Aboriginal world. And throughout the book, I felt the point strongly was that why isn't it valid already? That this system, this Euro-Western system, had come in and said this is an invalid form of life, or had deemed them subhuman, literally called them subhuman at some stages. But it was completely valid, and living completely off the land was never less than a valid way to live, and they don't need validation from the non-Aboriginal world, which is the way somebody puts it at the end. And I felt all those things that I've always believed were really very strongly underlined in every page of this book. And especially because in the last 15, 20 years, we've heard so much about the residential schools, and for that to be brought out with, heartbreaking, cruel clarity in this, and how much the kids, even the current generation, has internalized their racial oppression, where they're insulting each other with these racial epithets, which the white people put on them. It all comes down to that core of the the residential schools. I felt, and geez, I loved it. I don't know what. Despite my 6 pages of notes, I don't know what more I could really say about it. I just think it's absolutely great. But I think, maybe the best, rather than to read my 6 pages of notes, people should just read it, I think.
Yes, I agree. Paying the Land is published by Metropolitan Books. Want to support this podcast? You can help us out by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. Don't forget our Full Metal Alchemist podcast, The Law of Equivalent Exchange, is now in its own feed and available in the usual podcast outlets. Our review of Chapter 7 will be released next Monday. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. This Saturday, Brandon joins me for another critique. Then next Wednesday, Coom interviews Hilary Barta. He's done penciling and inking for Marvel, DC, Simpsons comics, and more over the years, and some writing as well, and he's got something new coming out from Marvel. He and writer Doug Rice have produced a story about Dr. Droom, who later became Dr. Druid, in the era of the Marvel Monsters, appearing in an anthology series simply called Marvel, Issue 4, being released today. He'll be here to talk about it next week. Till next time, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.